Most humanists simply identify themselves as humanists. However, some humanists choose to identify as religious humanists. And these are mainly some humanists in the Unitarian Universalist churches, humanists that belong to ethical culture societies, Society for Humanistic Judaism. These are all humanists that identify as religious humanists. Others identify as secular humanists. The only difference between a religious humanist and a secular humanist is that religious humanists have a need for ritual. That doesn't mean they believe in anything supernatural. They like ritual, they like traditions, and they call themselves religious. Among ourselves, there's really no need to argue. I've heard secular humanists say we have nothing in common with religious humanists. That's nonsense. I noticed in some of the newsletters on the back table that you had a Human Light celebration. Was it last year or the year before? Human Light would be the humanist equivalent of the winter celebrations. And it incorporates all of the traditions of the winter celebrations. And rituals are very important to a lot of people. And it's not worthwhile for people to say, if you're religious, then you cannot be a humanist, then you cannot be an atheist. The major national humanist organizations in this country are the American Humanist Association and the Council for Secular Humanism. Many non-theists also identify as agnostics. That term was first used by Thomas Henry Huxley in 1869. He used the term to describe his rejection of claims of knowledge of deities. The word gnostic, G-N-O-S-T-I-C, comes from a Greek word that describes spiritual knowledge. And an agnostic, agnostic, simply means without knowledge of these supernatural deities. Bertrand Russell and Robert Ingersoll are probably the two most famous atheists who identify themselves as agnostics. And today, many who call themselves agnostics, we hear definitions that there is simply insufficient knowledge to prove or disprove claims of God's existence, so they don't assert any opinion on theistic matters. Personally, I don't think that term, I think the term is used in many cases to cloak somebody's atheism. Because if you say you're an agnostic, it sounds a little less edgy than saying you're an atheist. But you either believe or you don't believe. And if you don't believe, you're an atheist. So if you say, I don't have enough evidence yet to believe, then you're not a believer. Okay? So I'm still not convinced of the significance of that term, but that's debatable. I'm not a final authority on that by a long run. I think the main problem with using the term agnostic is that it implies that there is equal evidence on both sides of the issue. It implies that there's as much evidence to believe as not to believe. Okay, I think the evidence not to believe is here. The evidence to believe, well, I can't go down low enough. Okay, ask me to prove it? No, I can't. Am I an agnostic? I'm an atheist. I don't believe. So that's another distinction in terms. Now, Sherwin Wine, Rabbi Sherwin Wine, was the founder of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and he developed a new term that he called ignosticism. That's IG. We didn't have enough terms, so he came up with agnosticism. Okay, so while both atheists and agnostics have a concept of a supernatural God, whether or not they believe that concept is real, an agnostic will not even discuss God until the term is meaningfully described. So if you asked Sherwin Wine, who was tragically killed in an auto accident last year, but if you asked him, what does he think about God, he'd say, this discussion is meaningless until you describe what you mean by God. If I get into a discussion on the existence or non-existence of God with a Christian fundamentalist, I love it, because I love to have these discussions. I know I'm not going to convince that person is not going to convince me, but we can have a very interesting discussion. We are both talking about a power that responds to our prayers, that's omnipotent, that is all powerful and all benevolent, and now we can discuss whether or not that kind of a creature exists. But when I try to discuss God with a Unitarian Universalist, I can go crazy, because God is nature, God is love, and if that's the case, there are words, there are great words for love. Love is great words for nature, but why call it God if that's not what you're conveying? Now, what I'm saying is just personal opinions, and I'm sure a lot of you don't agree with me, and that's where it'll be fun when we have a question and answer period later. But I'm unaware today of any national organization that's based on agnosticism or ignosticism. There are other non-theists, many other terms are used. Some identify as objectivists. And objectivism is a philosophy that was developed about 50 years ago by Ayn Rand, and her major novels were The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, in which she describes her philosophy. It's a non-theist philosophy. It's based on the importance of what she called rational self-interests. Her philosophy was that if one, it's a system of complete laissez-faire, that if one is interested in their own self-interest, then everybody will benefit in the long run. I look at it kind of like Reagan's trickle-down policy. But that's basically objectivism. The difference between humanists and objectivists is that objectivists specifically reject altruism, and humanists specifically endorse altruism. And that's the main basic difference. Well, I think I've covered most of the terms we use to describe our lack of belief in supernatural gods, and I'm sure if I omitted any, I'll hear about it when you get your chance. Today, in the past years, because of their lack of knowledge about our non-theistic philosophy, the American public, through its media, was constantly exposed to propaganda from the religious right, propaganda that characterized atheists as inherently evil. Today, however, thanks to the national best-selling books by authors such as Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, non-theists are being given more and more well-deserved respect in public discourse. The efforts of these authors to undemonize the word atheist has allowed non-theists, through their national organizations, to focus on many other concerns. Concerns such as church-state separation. We can now focus on these concerns rather than exclusively concentrating on the defense of our non-theism. And we are finally seeing a united front in this country in defense of the right of non-theists. We are finally seeing our national organizations cooperating with each other.